presentation is about how we're using the read-write API to improve some of our workflows within the open access team in the library. My name's Steve. I'm an open research librarian, specialised in open access at Manchester, and I'm going to be joined shortly by my colleague Nilani, who's going to talk about some of the technical stuff. We'll do a slightly awkward changeover and then change back. So, to get us started, as with most presentations at this kind of conference, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the context in which we were kind of working here, to explain a little bit about why we needed to use the API in the way I'm about to describe. So at Manchester, our researchers publish about 10,000 journal articles every year. That's research staff and research students. And in the open access team, we're there to support them to publish these articles in the most appropriate way to achieve open access. And that can mean achieving open access through lots of different routes, I suppose. So this can be gold open access via the payment of an article processing charge. We manage a couple of £1 million worth of open access funding that we dish out to publishers every year and feel slightly bad about. We have lots of open access agreements, which is just a different mechanism for us to give our money to publishers. So we've got about 27 of those that we manage on an annual basis. And then we've got a kind of a backup of green open access via our rights retention policy, which we've had in place since April 2023, I think. So we do open access, green open access through Pure as our repository. And then we've got this kind of other chunk of publications that become open access without us really needing to intervene because the corresponding authors are based at other institutions. So we often find out about them a little bit later on in the process. So this just makes things a little bit complicated for us. There's lots of different routes to achieving open access for our papers. And our interest isn't just in compliance with funder policies, it's really about understanding how we're making open access happen at Manchester. But while I say it's not just about complying with funder policies, I'll talk briefly about those now. One of the things that we find quite complicated is tracking compliance with a multitude of funder open access policies. Now, Pure's really good at helping us to understand where our papers have complied with the REF open access policy. That's the big one that affects everyone across the UK. But there's also a stack of other funder open access policies which we need to keep on top of as well. And lots of these overlap in lots of different ways, but there are also subtle differences which we're not really able to monitor and kind of keep track of in Pure. So in order to help us do that more effectively, we built this thing called the OACP, the Open Access Compliance Platform, and Nilani's spoken about this at previous conferences. It's due to lots of work. All credit to Nilani and her team for kind of building this, because it's absolutely invaluable. So just to quickly show you what this looks like, you might not be able to see this in very much detail, but I'll talk through what's on the screen. We pull metadata about research output from the Pure API, and it builds an OACP record. The OACP record looks a little bit like this. On the left-hand side, you can see the part of the record which is purely stuff taken from Pure, bibliographic metadata that's been entered into the Pure record, and you can see things like the DOI, the output type, things like that. But then on the right-hand side, you can see further down the record is the ability for us to add our own information, build our own kind of annotations to that metadata record. So you won't be able to see it, but here we're recording that this article has been published. We know it's got a publication date. We've added the a kind of a manual confirmation that it complies with a REF open access policy. We've marked that it's gold open access, and that open access has been facilitated by another institution. So we haven't paid an open access fee. It's not gone through one of our agreements, likely because, as I say, the corresponding author is based elsewhere, and we've recorded that there. And one thing that we've been able to add functionality around is that this paper has a data access statement of some kind. This is a UKRI requirement that we need to record whether a paper has a data access statement, or rather they require us to have that it requires us to record it, but we find it useful to record. And then, unhelpfully in this example, there's a bunch of funders listed there where we could mark whether they're compliant with those individual policies, but we've not needed to here because this particular paper hasn't acknowledged funding from any of these organisations. So it's just slightly more flexible and extendable when we need to take into account different funder requirements. So at Manchester, we've got a mediated deposit service, and this is just a fancy way of saying that we have a form on our website that people can send us their accepted manuscripts through. So researchers send us their AAMs, and we create Pure records on their behalf. Now, researchers can still go into Pure and do this themselves, but we kind of encourage them to let us do it for them, and they're often grateful to let us do the work, which is unsurprising. So we go in and we create the Pure records for them. We make sure that the metadata is of a high quality, and then what we do when we've done that is we bring that metadata record into the OACP, so we can start to annotate with that useful compliance-related information. So usually that happens at the acceptance stage, but that means that there's a process later on that we're setting up for ourselves because we need to add more information about our paper once it's been published. So once an article's been published, the Pure record should really be updated, but researchers aren't always very good, or I'm going to say never very good, at doing this accurately or at all. So they never really think to go back to the record and add in other information. And why should they? We've already created a record for them, so we've kind of taken responsibility for kind of keeping track of it. So available updates is something that Pure has, a function in Pure, but we actually find it slightly overwhelming. And I saw a really good talk from Groningen last year where they were basically saying they turned off available updates. And I got back from last year's Pure conference and immediately spoke to Laura Turner, our Pure guru, and said, can we do that too? And we haven't looked back. So instead, we use the OACP to help us kind of monitor updates to articles in a much more targeted way. So the problem with available updates, and I turned this back on in test for the purpose of putting these slides together, is that, as you can see here, there's 26,000 updates for us to work through if we wanted to use that functionality. You can obviously configure it so that it's a little bit more kind of accurate than this, but this is kind of a problem that we're facing. So we've got this functionality built within the OACP, which does some really interesting things. So it queries the CrossRef, easy for me to say, API every night, and tries to match journal article titles to identify where they might have been published. So it takes the title, checks Crossref, and then if it thinks it's found that article has now been published, it gives us a little flag on the top of the OACP record, and we can filter by records that have this, what we call potentially published flag on them. And that gives us a kind of a nudge to go in and update the Pure record with the new information that we found about that paper now that it's been published. So we can go in and update the Pure record, and then we have to go in and update the OACP record as well. We're kind of managing these two separate systems. So this is really good, but is quite time-consuming for us. So now we have the right API, we've been able to make this workflow much more efficient. So now when we go in, we see that an article has been published in our OACP. All we need to do is update our OACP record, and then that triggers some logic, which Nalani will talk about shortly, which determines how the corresponding Pure record should be updated via the API. So we'll add the publication date and DOI to the Pure record through the right API, and depending on how the article has been made open access or not, other changes are made to the Pure record. So I'll just show you an example of a before and after. So in this example record, this paper is going to be made open access through our rights retention policy, through green open access. And on the left-hand side, you can hopefully just about make out that before, the accepted manuscript that's been uploaded to this record is embargoed, waiting for publication. And then on the right-hand side, after we've completed the OACP record and hit submit, we can see that the embargoed accepted manuscript has now been made openly available. And we can see that the DOI has been added and marked as closed because that version is only available to subscribers. And if we were to kind of scroll up on that record, we'd see that the publication date had been added as well from the CrossRef metadata. So there's a couple of other issues that we've tried to tackle with the right API as well. One problem that we have, I mentioned earlier that we have about 27, 28 big open access agreements with publishers. And this means that sometimes we don't find out how articles are published open access until much later in the process. We get a big report maybe every month, every couple of months from a publisher to tell us these are all the papers that have been made open access through your agreement. And then we have a potentially quite long process of kind of inputting that data to kind of reflect what we know has gone through our agreements. But we've used the right API to make bulk changes to OACP and Pure Records, which has really sped this process up. And Nalani will mention that in a moment. This keeps our data clean and accurate without lots of time-consuming work, and opens up lots of opportunities for doing bulk editing of our records, which I'll maybe talk a little bit about at the end of this presentation. But to talk through some of the technical stuff that underpins all of the things I've been talking about so far, I'm going to very awkwardly hand over to Nalani, and I'll move out of the way.
Thanks, Steve. Hello. Hello, can you hear me? I think it's a bit low. So, yeah, so when we update the metadata in Pure, so for any data that we receive from Pure, we make sure that Pure is kept as the single source of truth. So when an update is triggered in OACP, it actually updates the Pure record. So then to get the data back to OACP, we use a synchronization process. So we have two type of synchronizers. One is instant update. So that is, it's kind of update occurs immediately, which receive data from Pure to OACP for that particular record. So other one is the daily scheduled nightly synchronization process, which will check all the Pure records and bring in any updates back to OACP. So for example, an author can be updating the record, or administrator can be updating the record. So all those updates are brought back to the OACP on a nightly basis. Yeah, so using the right API, so we use right API in two main ways. One is the instant update, that is to make immediate changes to individual Pure records. So this is, as I mentioned before, is done through the OACP application. The second one is the bulk update to efficiently update multiple records, multiple Pure records in a single process. So this is carried out through Java schedule task. Usually we try to run it over the weekends. So this example I'm going to talk about for using the right API for instant update. This process is to use to move the records from potentially published to published. So depending on because Steve was talking about different open access routes. So depending on the open access routes, the Pure record is updated differently. If the route is right retention or repository after embargo, we update the publication details, including status, date, DOI, access status, and version type. And if there's an embargoed file, we open the file and apply the CC by license and remove the embargo date. For the gold via APC route, we carry out the same status and publication updates, but the access status is set directly to open. And finally, if there's an embargoed electronic version, we close the file and remove the embargo date to keep the record consistent. So it looks like it's a complicated logic, but it's well managed by the Java code. And the required information is passed to the right API to make the necessary changes automatically. So meaning there's no room for human error, and everything is handled within one single application, especially the Steve team. They don't need to log into Pure and back, so everything is handled within OACP. So these examples for the bulk updates, I'm going to show you 3 examples. So this is the first example to update the workflow status to validated. So by making records validated in bulk, we remove them from the team's long review queue, so that they don't need to do it manually. So this is the data like we send to the JSON that this is very small JSON information. So we send it to the right API to mark the workflow status approved. And this can be done for multiple records in one go, passing the pure ID and this information. So it's very easy to do it through the backend. So this is another example of using the right API for bulk updates. So this is what we are doing is we are going to set the DOI access type to open for records where the published version is open access. So in total, around 2,300 records were updated in bulk. The process is quite straightforward. We retrieve the electronic version, part of the JSON for that record via the API and update the access type to open, and then send the updated information back. So we use the read API first to bring that small snippet, and then update a particular information and send it back on. So this ensures that the research outputs are publicly accessible under the open access policy and all handled again like automatically and efficiently. So this is that small JSON that we retrieve, and you can see we are updating the information and then putting it back on. So we don't need the whole JSON bringing in. We need to bring in only that electronic version as part of the JSON, and we send the data back. So this is the third example. So this is missing publication date, updating the missing publication dates. So these missing publication dates can cause a problem. So what we use is, we use the CrossRef data to fill in the gaps. So we updated around 50 records. This is kind of an, some kind of an exploration work. So we can do it further later on. So this process is straightforward. What we do is we retrieve the publication date from the CrossRef API, and we write the date into pure using the right API. So this ensures that all records have accurate publication dates, which improve metadata quality and make the research easy to discover. So this is the example JSON data. You can see we have to make sure we include the pure ID, and the publication status is set to publish, and we are also setting the publication date here, like 2022/4/12. So yeah, so these are some examples of using the right API. I'll now hand over back to Steve for our future plans. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Nalani, for updating us on all the technical stuff that I really don't understand, so thank you, that was great. So yeah, just to kind of finish off our presentation today, I thought I'd do a little bit of kind of future speculation, I suppose, about what else we can do with the right API. And some of the talks that we've heard already this morning in this room have kind of made me think about some of the things that we might think about as well. So we can think about other metadata that we could potentially add to the pure record when we update. We've been fairly limited in the kind of fields that we update automatically, but we could start to expand that. Once we're comfortable with what we're bringing in from CrossRef, we can maybe start to add other bibliographic metadata that might be missing. There's a whole bunch of work underway at Manchester about how we take data out of Pure to analyse it using Power BI. And one thing that we might look to do is create a kind of metadata health report about our Pure publication data and start to identify where bits of metadata might be missing. So we could do maybe a traffic light system where green means that everything's great, and amber means that maybe there's a few things missing, and red means that some of these records are actually really awful. And we can use that data to go in and maybe fix those problems in bulk rather than kind of working through big lists of metadata records to update. So we can do lots of things by taking the data out of Pure, doing stuff with it and then putting it back in. And that's definitely not the technical way of describing how that works. But thinking about the kind of AI-assisted research information things we've been talking about this morning, there's kind of lots of opportunities for us to take that data, as I say, out of Pure, to kind of manipulate it in interesting ways, potentially with the use of LLMs, and then put that metadata back in, and that's something I think we'll probably be exploring quite a bit over the next year or so. And at Manchester, we're very keen on AI, as everyone else is in UK higher education at the moment, so lots of potential for us to do interesting work there. Also, something I haven't mentioned on this slide is that there's potentially a big increase in scale for how we might use green open access at Manchester over the next couple of years, where I mentioned with a slight wince all of the different agreements that we have and all the money we're giving to publishers, and potentially the university's strategy might be to move away from signing up to all these expensive open access agreements, and that's kind of the position that the UK higher education sector seems to be kind of tentatively moving towards. So if we're publishing more papers open access through green open access for our rights retention policy, the number of papers that we will then have to track from acceptance all the way through to publication, taking into account all of those different updates that need to happen, will increase significantly, and this is where the use of the right API will really come into its own in doing that at scale. So that's potentially how we might use the right API going forward. And then there's potential uses for other modules too. I mentioned in the library we have responsibility for the publications module. We don't really get too involved in the other modules in Pure. But there are, I imagine, potential use cases across all of the different modules that the team across the University of Manchester use Pure for. So we're always willing to work with them to think about how we might extend the use of the right API to those different modules and different output types that we record in Pure. So I think that's all I had planned to say today. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, me and Nalani are happy to field them. Thank you very much.